Tyrion stood before his father in the softly lit expanse of the command pavilion, the drape of heavy canvas shutting out the night's chill. Tywin Lannister looked much as he always had in Tyrion's memories, a pillar of silent authority, clad in gilded plate, eyes cold as cut emeralds. A map of the Westerlands and the Crownlands sprawled across the oak table behind him, weighted at the corners by daggers and metal paperweights. Scribes lingered near the tent's edges, silent as ghosts, awaiting orders. Guards were posted by the entrance, so still they might have been statues. The air smelled of lamp oil, old parchment, and the faint tang of steel. For a moment, father and son studied each other without speaking. Tyrion swallowed, feeling his throat dry. He had always known this meeting could end in any number of ways: negotiation, rebuke, imprisonment, or a swift slash of a blade. Tywin's face gave nothing away. He merely removed one glove, flexing his bare hand as if testing how easily a sword might fit into it. "You have come a long way, Tyrion," Tywin finally said. His tone was soft, yet steely as any sword. "My outriders informed me you travel under a royal banner. That suggests you have not come to pledge yourself to your family's cause." He allowed a wry, mirthless twist of his lips. "Though we both know you have never been a devoted son." Tyrion resisted the urge to bristle. He forced calm into his voice. "I come in the name of King Robert, yes, but also in the name of reason. There are terms to be discussed, if you are willing." Tywin arched a pale brow. "Terms? You speak of the bastard accusations?" The slanders poured upon Cersei and Jaime. His voice sharpened, each word like a tiny blade. "Robert demands that I declare my own children criminals, is that it? While he sits upon the throne they served for years." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Robert's viewpoint is that Cersei and Jaime have confessed. Under duress, no doubt," Tywin snapped, "to bedding each other and producing children not of Baratheon blood. Robert claims that means Joffrey and the others are not his heirs. He wants no confusion about the royal succession. Believe me, father, this is no trivial matter. Robert is prepared to bring the entire realm to war for it." Tywin's eyes glittered, unwavering. "And do you imagine I will not do the same to defend my blood? I've no interest in bending the knee to a usurper who now calls my children vile names and strips them of all dignity. Jaime is Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, an honor bestowed by the previous king, though Robert was pleased enough to keep him in place while it served him. Cersei was Robert's queen for near 16 years. Now he would brand them traitors." His gloved hand tightened on the table's edge. "And you, my wayward son, have played a part in this, have you not? Word travels quickly, even when ravens fail. Cersei told me of your meddling." Tyrion suppressed a flicker of panic. If this conversation devolved into personal recriminations, he might never steer it back to diplomacy. "I won't deny I revealed the truth. It was bound to emerge regardless. Ned Stark had discovered it, and my sister would have killed him or he would have condemned her. One way or another, King's Landing was a tinderbox. I only forced the matter before it turned into open slaughter." Tywin's mouth thinned. "You call it forcing the matter. Others might call it treachery." Tyrion straightened his shoulders. "Father, I know you see me as the black sheep of this family. You've never made a secret of that. But I remind you, if I truly wished to sabotage House Lannister, I could have remained in King's Landing and urged Robert to execute Jaime and Cersei outright. I did not. I came here alone under a flag of truce to offer you a way to save them." Tywin's gaze flickered over Tyrion's face. Finally he turned and sank onto a camp chair behind the broad table. He gestured to the opposite side. "Sit," he said, as though granting a sullen audience to a petty lord. Tyrion exhaled. He lowered himself carefully into the chair, adjusting the drape of his cloak. He felt small, smaller than usual beneath Tywin's scrutiny. Yet a faint spark of hope stirred. If Tywin was willing to converse rather than ordering him seized or killed, that meant there might be a path forward. "Speak of these terms," Tywin commanded. Tyrion nodded. "Robert demands that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen be acknowledged as Lannister bastards, disinherited from the Iron Throne. He also demands that Jaime and Cersei remain in his custody to face the king's justice. Tywin's lip curled. Laughable. Tyrion lifted a hand. He is, however, open to sparing their lives, exile, for example, in Essos or the Free Cities. Possibly even the option for Jaime to take the Black if Jaime so chooses. The children also would not be harmed, but they would be barred from the succession. A lesser holding might be arranged for them, or they might remain wards in King's Landing for a time. Robert's main concern is to remove them from the line of inheritance and quell any chance of civil strife. A cold silence. Tywin's knuckles whitened against the table as he folded his bare hand into a fist. The brazier's light danced over the planes of his face, stark with suppressed anger. And if I refuse these so-called mercies? Tyrion swallowed. Then the king calls his banners. Already the Stormlands and the Riverlands prepare for war. The Crownlands will stand with Robert. Possibly the Vale as well, if Ned Stark can reach Lisa Arryn's ear. You stand alone, father, though you are formidable. If you do not relent, Robert will do all in his power to see House Lannister crushed. You recall how swiftly he moved against the Targaryens. Tywin's jaw twitched, though his expression was otherwise unreadable. Yes, he said quietly, I do recall. But recall as well that I was the one who sacked King's Landing for him, and placed the bodies of Aerys's grandchildren at his feet. It was Lannister might that ended the war. Robert owes me a debt, not the other way around. And he might remember that too, Tyrion said carefully. But he was not pleased by the slaughter of Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon, as I've heard it told. Not truly, nor did it endear him to you. He tolerated you for your gold and your armies. Now, with the might of the entire realm, he believes he can best you. The mention of that dark moment in House Lannister's history only hardened Tywin's features further. He took a measured breath. My scouts say that Robert's muster is incomplete. Stannis Baratheon lurks on Dragonstone, hesitant to come. The Vale is ruled by a frightened widow. The north is distant. The Riverlands, yes, they may join him, and the Stormlands. But you underestimate the wealth of the West. My banners have been called from Lannisport to Castamir's ruins to the Golden Tooth. If war is upon us, we shall not be the ones who face immediate defeat. Tyrion stared at his father's face, searching for some sign that there might be a willingness to compromise. Tywin had always been proud, unwavering, inflexible where the family name was concerned. To brand his grandchildren bastards was an unthinkable humiliation in his eyes. I understand your position, Tyrion said. I do. But you must also see that if you press a war, thousands will die, common folk, knights, your own men, and ours. Is that truly what you want, just to keep Joffrey labeled as Robert's heir? Even though it's a lie. Tywin's eyes narrowed. You speak of it as though your sister's children are worthless. They are Lannisters, the rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, if the king recognized them for years. Robert can hardly claim he only just discovered their hair color is too fair. That's precisely what he claims, Tyrion said, exasperation seeping into his voice. And it's not only hair color, but enough genealogical proof to fill entire volumes. You know as well as I do that Baratheon blood yields dark-haired offspring in every generation. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen. They are gold of hair, all of them, bearing the Lannister look. Jon Arryn died investigating this. Ned Stark followed his footsteps. Now Robert cannot ignore it. Tywin rose from his chair with deliberate poise. He paced around the table, the torchlight flickering across his armor's gilded edges. I will not yield to gossip and rumor. I will not see my lineage slandered. Robert chooses to scapegoat my children for his own dissatisfaction. If the realm must bleed, so be it. If I place Jaime or Cersei on the throne by conquest, so be it. Tyrion's heart sank. You would risk open rebellion for that? No other lord of the realm will accept Jaime or Cersei's child as rightful king if it's proven the father is Jaime himself. They will see it as incest. They will see it as a vile corruption on the throne. And what of it? Tywin demanded. Do you think half the lords of Westeros have not wedded cousins or siblings in times past? The Targaryens themselves married brother to sister for centuries. The realm accepted them well enough until Robert decided to seize power. If Robert can seize the throne, why not House Lannister, the richest house in the kingdom? He gave Tyrion a withering look. You have always underestimated what force can achieve. Tyrion's voice came out hoarse with frustration. Forcing the realm to bow will paint us as tyrants. The other great houses might unite to stop us. And if they do, we will be outnumbered. Father, I beg you, consider an arrangement that spares the family from total ruin. The shadows cast by the braziers stretched across Tywin's features, making him look older and more severe. And you say Robert's arrangement is to let my children languish in some foreign city, their reputations in tatters, while he anoints a new heir, possibly his brother Stannis or that fool Renly. And all of Westeros will look upon House Lannister as broken. Tyrion nodded grimly. You can spin it as a compromise. The king could disclaim the charges publicly, calling them a private matter, so that the realm need not know every sordid detail. Jaime and Cersei might be said to have conspired to place Joffrey on the throne, but it can be framed as an unfortunate misunderstanding, anything to reduce the shame. But they cannot remain in King's Landing, nor can the children remain in line for the throne. Robert will never agree to that. Tywin circled back behind the table, posture rigid. He set both hands on the map, leaning over it. The hush in the tent was absolute. One of the scribes at the edge looked up, blinking anxiously. Tywin waved him off, and the scribe bowed his head once more. Why are you truly here, Tyrion? Tywin asked quietly, not looking at him. Is it truly to prevent bloodshed? Or do you fear the war that is coming? Fear that you might be on the losing side whichever way you jump? Tyrion closed his eyes, just for a heartbeat, summoning the frankness he'd always wanted to show his father. Yes, he admitted. I fear the war. I fear what it will do to the small folk, to Jaime, to all of us. I do not want to see your legacy destroyed in a fruitless attempt to keep a bastard boy on the throne. I do not want to watch you lose another child. Gods know you have only 3, and you despise me. He swallowed, pushing down the bitter taste in his mouth. Is that so wrong? I am offering you the best chance we have to salvage something. Let the children go into exile with their mother. Save Jaime from the king's wrath by negotiating a lesser punishment. House Lannister need not be stripped of its lands or name. Robert would still rely on your gold, your influence. Your seat at Casterly Rock would remain untouchable. Tywin's face was carved from stone. You speak as if that is a victory. It is merely an avoidance of utter defeat. In war, sometimes that is the only victory there is. Tywin remained silent for a long span of breaths. Tyrion waited, heart hammering. Outside, the murmured talk of soldiers drifted on the night air, laced with the occasional snort of horses or clang of metal. At last, Tywin let out a soft hiss of breath. I must reflect on this. For now, you will remain in my camp as a guest, under watch. If I find reason to doubt your sincerity, I'll have you cast in irons. Understood. Tyrion bowed his head. Understood. Relief warred with lingering fear in his gut. At least Tywin hadn't simply declared war on the spot or ordered Tyrion's head parted from his shoulders. Tywin straightened. Go now, rest. I will summon you at dawn to speak further. My steward will arrange a tent for you. Do not wander. Tyrion accepted that with a curt nod. Very well. He turned, making for the tent flap, half expecting a guard to seize him before he reached it. But the guards only parted, letting him out into the cool night air. Outside, the lines of flickering fires stretched in all directions. An army's worth. Tyrion's small escort of gold cloaks waited with tense postures. When they saw Tyrion emerge unscathed, they exhaled in relief. A tall, sandy-haired knight in Lannister colors approached. Tyrion recognized him as Ser Kevin's man, but Kevin himself was nowhere in sight. Kevin was Tywin's brother, after all, Tyrion's uncle, though Tywin often commanded personally. You will come with me, the knight said brusquely, gesturing for Tyrion to follow. Your men may set their tents beside the supply wagons. Keep to yourselves. Lord Tywin does not wish an incident. Tyrion nodded and instructed Sergeant Rosen to remain calm. Together, they followed the knight through the forest of tents, eventually stopping at a modest spot near the edge of the camp. A rectangular space opened up by a line of wagons filled with feed and grain. Some bored men-at-arms squatted by a nearby fire, looking on with detached curiosity. The knight indicated 2 small tents, newly pitched. "Yours, Lord Tyrion," he said, "and that one for your men. Guards will watch you. If you need anything, speak to me or my men, not to random passers-by." "Thank you, sir," Tyrion said, trying to sound genial. He doubted there would be comfort in these tents, but at least they would keep the wind off. His escort set about making a small fire of their own, glancing warily at the Lannister men milling about. Tyrion slipped inside his assigned tent. It contained a straw pallet for sleeping, a single oil lantern, and a small trunk. A pungent smell of freshly cut canvas greeted him. Not exactly a lord's comforts, but far better than a prison cell. He lit the lantern and sank onto the pallet, exhaling. The day's tension thrummed in his bones, leaving him wearier than he cared to admit. He replayed every word of the conversation with Tywin. The old lion's refusal to yield was no surprise, nor was his readiness to spill blood. But Tyrion sensed a shred of caution in him. Tywin might not truly want to fight the entire realm, no matter how proud he was. If Tyrion could nudge him toward some compromise, but it would take more than words. Perhaps Tywin wanted a gesture of good faith from Robert, something beyond condemnation and exile. Possibly there was a more cunning arrangement, like forging a marriage between some of Robert's bastards and a lesser Lannister scion, or granting Tywin privileges that offset the disgrace of the children's disinheritance. Tyrion would have to think deeply about what might sway his father. Meanwhile, time was running short. Robert's musters would move soon, and if Tywin's outriders began raiding, or if there was a chance crossing of armies in the field, war could erupt anyway, making all negotiations moot. Tyrion rubbed his eyes. "Gods help me," he murmured. "I've never wanted to be in the thick of such matters, yet here I am." He doubted he would sleep, but exhaustion overcame him soon enough. His dreams were fractured, images of Cersei's furious eyes, Jaime's shackled hands, Tywin's stern face, a swirl of golden banners, the Iron Throne twisting like molten steel. When he jolted awake some hours later, dawn's gray light filtered through the tent. A guard was already calling outside, "Lord Tyrion, Lord Tywin summons you." Groaning, Tyrion rolled to his feet. He splashed water on his face from a small basin. The cold shock cleared some of the webs of sleep from his mind. Outside, the camp stirred, men collecting their gear, cooking breakfast over small fires. The smell of barley porridge, horse dung, and dew-damp canvas filled the air. His escort from King's Landing stirred too, though he told them to remain behind. "I'll meet with my father alone," Tyrion said. "No need to provoke more tension." Accompanied only by the knight from the night before, Tyrion walked once more through the labyrinth of tents to Tywin's central pavilion. The night's gloom was replaced by the crisp hush of early morning. The army seemed subdued but efficient. He noticed Lannister men brushing down horses, sharpening swords, packing up gear. They were clearly prepared to move at short notice. Tywin might be waiting for an answer from Tyrion, but he was not idle. He ducked into the pavilion to find Tywin already seated behind the large table, conferring with 2 of his bannermen. One was Ser Adam Marbrand, and the other was Lord Brax, presumably just arrived from the same road Tyrion had traveled. They both glanced at Tyrion, then at Tywin. "You may wait outside, my lords," Tywin said, dismissing them. Marbrand inclined his head politely, while Lord Brax cast Tyrion a suspicious look before following. Once they were gone, Tywin turned his full attention on Tyrion. "Sit." Tyrion obeyed, noting that Tywin had changed from partial armor to a more comfortable leather jerkin emblazoned with the golden lion. A quill and parchment lay on the table, along with a sealed scroll bearing Robert's sigil. The king's letter of safe passage, presumably. "You have considered the matter further, father?" Tyrion asked, trying for a neutral tone. Tywin steepled his fingers. I have. If Robert would confine my children to exile, brand my grandchildren as bastards, and expect me to swallow it all, he is mistaken. However, I see that open war on every front might prove complicated. So I propose a counteroffer. His lips pressed together. I want my children returned, not as criminals to be executed or caged, but under house arrest in Casterly Rock, if Robert truly insists. A guard of his men could remain as wards, if that is necessary. Tyrion nodded slowly, absorbing that. You want Jaime and Cersei placed under your authority in the West, rather than Robert's. And the children. Tywin's gaze was flinty. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen remain under my protection as well. If Robert must declare them bastards, let him do so, but quietly, without parading them through the streets in shame. Perhaps an official statement that the marriage was invalid or the parentage uncertain, but not an open condemnation of incest. I will not have them scorned like gutter rats. Tyrion considered it. Robert might balk, as they remain a threat so long as they live in Westeros. He wants to ensure none of them can challenge the throne in the future. Then let him hold them as wards in the Red Keep instead, Tywin snapped. So long as Jaime and Cersei are returned to me in good health. I might allow the children to remain in King's Landing for a time, but eventually I want them as well. Tyrion pursed his lips. I doubt Robert will allow all of them to gather under your roof. He'll fear you might quietly reassert their claim, or use them to incite a rebellion. Also, Ned Stark believes you might kill the children yourself to ensure no evidence remains of the incest. Tywin's eyes flash. Ed with outrage. Absurd. Jaime is my heir, and the children are of my blood. Why would I kill them? For strategic reasons, hostages can become liabilities. That's how Ned Stark thinks. He knows you are ruthless. Tywin drew a sharp breath, then proposed something else. Cersei and Jaime are not to remain in that filthy city as Robert's prisoners, rotting in a tower. If he means to remove them from power, so be it, but they are Lannisters. I will not have them paraded to the block or exiled like criminals. That is my line. A sense of weariness tugged at Tyrion. He rubbed his temple. I understand. Perhaps Robert could be convinced to release them into your custody if you pledge publicly to keep them from any position of power. Essentially, they would be your wards as well, living quietly in the Rock. Meanwhile, the children remain in King's Landing under the King's guardianship, ensuring that you cannot raise them as figureheads for rebellion. In time, perhaps the children could go to Essos, given a comfortable life far away so they cannot threaten the throne. Robert wants them out of the line of succession. Tywin nodded grudgingly. Something along those lines. Without the vile label of incest, he added, scowling. Tyrion watched him. That is more difficult. The realm already whispers it. Robert's entire rationale is that they are not his offspring. If he retracts those charges, the realm will believe him weak or manipulated. He can spin it however he likes, Tywin said flatly, but I will not have the word incest repeated in every corner of Westeros. Tyrion spread his hands. Father, you cannot stop the rumor mill, but you might encourage Robert to frame it as a simple annulment, that the marriage produced no true heirs, so the children are not recognized. The specifics remain muddled. Jon Arryn's investigation is overshadowed by some other pressing matter. Possibly the king claims the children died of an illness, replaced by some new heir, Stannis or Renly. You see, the truth might remain a whispered scandal, never confirmed officially. Tywin's mouth tightened in distaste. If that is the best we can manage. It may be. With that approach, you keep Jaime and Cersei. The children remain wards or vanish from public view. Robert avoids publicly calling them incest-born, and you avoid open war. Tyrion paused. He will also demand certain concessions, that you disband your armies at once, pay some recompense for the cost of the crown's mobilization, and vow no further hostilities. Tywin studied Tyrion as though weighing the cost of such a vow. A tribute, of course. The crown is always hungry for gold. Better that than thousands dead in the fields. Tyrion said quietly. Tywin stared at the map for a moment, then dipped his quill in ink and began scribbling. Tyrion watched the lines of his father's face. Despite Tywin's calm bearing, Tyrion could almost sense the swirling anger inside him, the frustration that he must bargain at all. House Lannister had rarely been forced to capitulate to anyone. Yet perhaps Jaime's captivity forced Tywin's hand. Jaime was the golden son, the legacy Tywin cherished above all else. When Tywin finished writing, he blotted the parchment. "Very well. I have penned an outline of my demands. I want you to take this to Robert. Let him consider it. If he refuses outright, I will march. That is my final word." Tyrion braced himself. "If you march, the realm bleeds." Tywin's voice was cold. "Then let it bleed." He handed Tyrion the parchment, rolled and sealed with the wax of House Lannister. Tyrion tucked it into his satchel with a somber nod. "I will deliver it." Tywin stood, arms clasped behind his back. "You will leave my camp at once. I'll provide an escort to see you beyond my pickets. From there, you can hurry back to King's Landing and lay these terms before Robert. If he agrees, then I shall consider a formal treaty. If not, I have no further reason to delay." Tyrion's mouth felt dry. "I understand." He nearly turned to go, then paused. "Father, a final question. What of me?" Tywin regarded him with a hint of distant curiosity. "What of you? When all this is settled, one way or another, where do I stand in House Lannister's eyes? You consider me a traitor or a meddler, perhaps, but I have tried to save Jaime's life. Cersei's too, in some small way. Will that matter? Or will you cast me out regardless?" For a moment, Tywin said nothing. Then, "That depends on whether your meddling achieves a favorable result. If you secure my children's release and the continuance of House Lannister's standing, we shall speak further. If you fail—" He let the silence finish the sentence. Tyrion bowed his head, concealing the bitterness in his gut. That was all the fatherly affection Tywin had to offer. "Very well," he murmured, then turned and left before his father could see any flicker of pain in his eyes. Outside, Ser Adam Marbrand awaited him with a contingent of mounted spearmen. They eyed Tyrion with guarded respect. "Come," Ser Adam said. "We'll see you to the edge of camp." Tyrion found his gold cloaks quickly enough. They looked relieved to depart. They packed their tents in haste and mounted. Within an hour, they rode west, out of the lines of Lannister pickets, and onto the open road. Overhead, clouds gathered in a sky of dull pewter, as though a storm threatened. Tyrion led the way, mind racing with the shape of Tywin's demands. He could already imagine Robert balking. Ned Stark too, likely. Yet if they refused, war was guaranteed. The first day of travel back was tense but uneventful. Tyrion and his men pressed as fast as they dared, wanting to return to King's Landing quickly before hostilities broke out elsewhere. On the second day, they passed a column of sellswords in ragged gear, evidently heading west to offer their services to Tywin. The two groups eyed each other warily but did not clash. By the third night, the Rose Road was busier. A small contingent of Stormland knights cantered by, hurrying for the capital. Warlike energy crackled in every footstep. At last, near sundown on the fifth day, the towering walls of King's Landing came into view. Tyrion's party reached the gates, which were thronged with refugees and merchants. Soldiers wearing the gold cloaks of the city watch patrolled, suspicious of any infiltration. Tyrion and his escort were recognized and admitted, though the guards took note of the presence of a Lannister envoy. Inside, the city roiled with tension. The markets were half empty, shutters closed, people muttering about rumors of war. Tyrion urged his horse onward, ignoring the curses thrown his way. Some denounced him as a Lannister who brought war. Others seemed unsure whether to cheer him for defying his family. He pressed on, weary, wanting only to reach the Red Keep. They climbed the twisting streets, crossed the massive gatehouse, and found the outer courtyard of the Red Keep teeming with soldiers. Tyrion dismounted, wincing at the ache in his legs. Sergeant Rosen and the others also slid from their saddles, looking relieved to be back among their own. A functionary scurried up to Tyrion, breathless. "My lord, the king demands your presence immediately." "Of course he does," Tyrion muttered. He handed the reins to a stable boy and hurried inside. The Red Keep's corridors echoed with the clang of arms and the bustle of men. The entire fortress felt like a hive preparing for an invasion. Tyrion was directed to the throne room, but as he neared, he realized that King Robert was likely meeting with his war council. Indeed, the grand doors were flung open. Within, lords stood in clusters, small pockets of conversation echoing off the vaulted ceiling. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed behind Robert Baratheon, who looked red-cheeked and furious. When Tyrion arrived, a hush spread. Lords parted to give him space. He saw Ned Stark near Robert's side, along with Renly, Baelish, and a scattering of knights. Robert glared down the hall. "Imp," he called, voice booming. "You have returned from your father's camp?" Tyrion forced a bow, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in his gut. "I have, your grace." "Well, speak then," Robert demanded. "What does Tywin say? Has the old lion surrendered himself to my will, or does he still yowl about his false heirs?" Tyrion straightened, stepping forward. "He has prepared a counteroffer, your grace." "May I read it?" Robert grimaced. "I can read well enough. Bring it to me." He reached down from the elevated platform in front of the throne. A steward hurried to Tyrion, took the sealed roll from his hand, and delivered it to the king. Ned and Renly crowded close as Robert broke the seal. Tyrion stood at a respectful distance but could see the flickers of emotion crossing the king's face. Robert read silently at first, his jaw muscles tightening. Eventually, Ned read over his shoulder. The tension in the throne room was palpable. When Robert finished, he let out a roar of laughter, but there was no mirth in it. "He demands I release Jaime and Cersei from custody and place them under his so-called protection, as if they were babes in need of a nurse. He wants me to hush up the truth, let the children remain untainted by the word bastard, and pay him courtesy for even negotiating. Does he think me a fool?" The lords murmured among themselves. Tyrion ventured a small step. "Your grace, Lord Tywin is seeking a face-saving arrangement. He will keep the children, or at least keep Jaime and Cersei. He might allow the children to remain in your care, but he wants the official story to avoid the word incest. He is prepared to stand down his armies if you agree to these terms. Could spare us a war." Robert slammed his fist against the arm of the throne. "Spare a war by letting my traitorous wife and her brother run off to the Rock and keep me from exacting justice? No, they must pay for their treason." Ned placed a calming hand on Robert's forearm. "Your grace, consider the realm. If Tywin truly will not relent otherwise, we must weigh the cost in blood. Thousands could die if we refuse. The notion of face-saving is more palatable than a battlefield littered with corpses." Robert glared, fists clenched. Then he glanced at Renly. "Brother, what say you?" Renly shrugged, lips pressed thin. "I do not like the idea of letting them walk free. They have offended your honor as king. But if it prevents Tywin from unleashing his armies, perhaps we can negotiate some middle ground. Maybe we allow Jaime and Cersei to dwell in the Rock under guard. The children remain here, recognized only as wards. We need not claim them as your heirs." Ned spoke quietly. The king might proclaim that the royal marriage was annulled due to irreconcilable differences, and that no children from the union are recognized as rightful. If the word incest is never spoken, the realm might remain ignorant, as Tywin wishes. But you would remove Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen from the succession. They become wards or minor nobility at best. Robert's face reddened. "So I let the realm continue to think me father to those whelps? That my marriage ended in some hush-hush fiasco? I was made a fool for years. How can I swallow that?" Tyrion lifted his head. "Your grace, I do not deny it is galling, but this arrangement could save countless lives. What is your pride compared to that?" Robert's eyes flicked to Tyrion with undisguised irritation. "Easy for you to say, dwarf. It's not your pride that's trampled. But He turned, scanning the throng of lords. Some wore expressions of worry, others of cunning calculation. What if I simply make an example of them? Put Cersei on trial, strip Jaime of his white cloak, let them both face the headsman, or burn them alive like the Mad King might have done to me. Littlefinger cleared his throat from the sidelines, stepping forward with that perpetual half-smirk. If you do so, my king, Tywin Lannister will be forced to respond. He cannot let an open execution of his son and daughter go unchallenged. To do so would lose him the respect of his bannermen. The West might secede. We'd face a war that could tear the realm apart, with House Tyrell, House Martell, and others picking sides. Protracted conflict would be costly. I can speak to the coin, at least. The crown is already in debt. A war would deepen that debt immeasurably. Robert muttered an oath, then shot Tyrion a withering look. So your father demands I pretend none of this vile incest took place, that Joffrey and the others are simply whisked out of the line of succession like some quiet afterthought? Tyrion inclined his head. More or less. Your Grace, if you have a better solution, I'm all ears. But Tywin's letter is final. If you reject it outright, he marches at once. A fraught hush settled. Then Robert heaved a ragged sigh. Ned, gather the council. We'll talk this through in detail, see if there's some compromise. Gods be good. I'd rather be off hunting than dealing with this. But here I am. Ned bowed. As you wish. Robert rose heavily from the throne, beckoning Ned, Renly, Baelish, and a few others to join him in the small council chamber. Tyrion stepped forward tentatively, unsure if he would be included. Robert waved a dismissive hand. Imp, come if you must. You might as well see how we weigh your father's demands. So Tyrion followed them out of the throne room, across echoing halls, and into the council chamber. A long table surrounded by tall-backed chairs. The windows overlooked the city, which shimmered beneath the westering sun. Braziers burned, though the day was not overly cold. Ned took his seat near the head of the table. Robert all but collapsed into the seat at the end, resting his warhammer unceremoniously against the wall. Renly, Baelish, and Pycelle joined them, while Varys slipped in quietly, wearing a pensive expression. Tyrion found a place near the middle of the table. No one offered him a seat of honor. He was, after all, both a Lannister and a representative of the king's negotiations. He felt eyes on him, some suspicious, some curious. Robert rubbed his temples. So, do we actually consider letting Jaime and Cersei slip away? Varys, you haven't spoken yet. Varys folded his hands in his voluminous sleeves. If your grace truly wishes to avoid war, you will have to give Lord Tywin some measure of what he wants. He must not appear weak to his own bannermen. The pride of House Lannister is legendary. Pycelle cleared his throat, white whiskers trembling. Your Grace, as Grand Maester, I humbly suggest caution. House Lannister is a cornerstone of the realm's stability. A violent clash could invite foreign opportunists, or encourage the Iron Islands to raid, or the Dornish to seek revenge for old wounds. A realm in chaos is a breeding ground for further chaos. Renly waved a hand dismissively. Yes, but I am not comfortable letting Jaime Lannister escape without consequence. He stabbed the Mad King in the back, he fathered children with his own sister, and Robert made him Kingsguard? It is an affront. At the least, Jaime should be stripped of the white cloak and exiled. Ned's voice carried quiet authority. Strip him of the white cloak, yes. That was given under false pretenses. Exile might be acceptable if Lord Tywin agrees to keep him from any position of leadership. Baelish leaned in, fingertips idly tapping the table. And the queen? The king's former queen, rather. What of her? She orchestrated all this, after all. If Robert simply sets her free, it might look as though he's been played for a fool. Robert's fist slammed onto the table, making cups rattle. I have been played for a fool. That is the point. But, he broke off, exhaling. But to keep the realm from war, I might choke back that humiliation. If we must, at least let it be done quietly with no fanfare. Send her away. I never want to lay eyes on her again. Tyrion studied the lines on Robert's face. The king looked haggard, older than his years, as though all the wine and regrets had come home to roost. He wondered if Robert still felt any vestige of affection for Cersei. Likely not. "Your Grace," Tyrion ventured gently, "if you let them both go quietly, while you reassert your rightful claim to the throne, you can name your brother Stannis as heir or Renly as you choose. The realm will accept it if you do so with enough conviction. But we must decide swiftly, or Tywin will muster his forces and march east." Robert glared at Tyrion, though not with the same blazing hatred as before. "I'd sooner name my bastard Gendry as heir than Stannis," he growled under his breath. "But the law is the law. Stannis comes before Renly in the line of succession. My lady wife, former wife, has cost me dearly, but I won't let her cost me the realm. Very well. I'll write an answer to Tywin. If he can accept the following terms, I'll hold my hand from war. Jaime and Cersei are exiled to Casterly Rock, never to return to the capital. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen are wards of the crown until they come of age. Their parentage is set aside with no official mention of incest, only that the marriage was annulled. They are therefore not recognized as Baratheon heirs. Let them keep the name Lannister if they like. Or Hill for all I care." Ned frowned slightly. "And if Joffrey tries to stake a claim on the throne anyway?" Robert bared his teeth in something akin to a snarl. "Then I'll have his head. I'll have them all back in chains if they dare defy me." He paused, looking at Tyrion. "Are these terms you think your father will accept?" Tyrion paused. "He might. He'll chafe at your keeping the children as wards, but that is less humiliating than a public condemnation. The question is how long you intend to keep them. A year? 5 years? Until they're adults? If you never release them, Tywin will see that as kidnapping." Baelish smirked. "Yes, but kidnapping by the king is still law if the king so chooses. We can frame it more politely as a fosterage. The children are fostered at court, where they can be watched." Robert rubbed his brow. "Right, a fosterage. Fine. If Tywin wants them back someday, he can come and kneel before me in person to ask for it. That might keep him from starting trouble." Ned quietly intervened. "Your Grace, we may not wish to be so overtly insulting. Let it be a negotiated timeline. For instance, until the children reach their 12th year, or until Tywin fulfills some vow of good conduct. We want to avoid spurring him to hostility later." Robert grunted. "All right, yes, do it that way. Write up the specifics, Ned. Let Tywin know I will not budge on key points. Jaime and Cersei remain exiled from power. The children remain wards until I see fit. No mention of incest, but no recognition of them as heirs. And Tywin must disband his armies at once." Varys bowed slightly. "Your Grace has chosen the path of diplomacy, which is wise indeed. Shall we prepare a raven? Or will we send Lord Tyrion again?" Robert scowled at Tyrion, then let out a reluctant sigh. "We'll send the imp if he's willing. Tywin seems more likely to listen to him than a random messenger. And you, dwarf, don't think I trust you, but you're the best chance we have to avoid war." He drummed his fingers on the table. "Plus, if you betray me, at least I'm rid of you." Tyrion chose not to flinch. "As you say, Your Grace, I will take your terms back to my father." Ned inclined his head. "We'll have the letter drafted tonight, sealed by the king and the hand, along with our great seal. You can depart at dawn." Baelish rose, brushing non-existent dust from his doublet. "It appears our small council has accomplished something extraordinary, an avoidance of certain bloodshed. Let us hope it does not come undone." With that, the meeting adjourned, lords filtering out to return to their duties. Tyrion lingered behind, glancing at Ned. "My lord," he said softly, "what of my sister and brother in the meantime? Have they been kept in decent conditions?" Ned regarded Tyrion with an unreadable expression. "They are well enough. Cersei is confined to a tower suite with guards. Jaime is in a secure room also guarded. Neither is mistreated, though both are resentful. I have men ensuring they remain separate. We feared if they were placed together, they might concoct an escape." Tyrion nodded. Might I see them? Ned hesitated. Jaime is more dangerous, but you may speak with Cersei, if you like, in the presence of guards. Tyrion thanked him and made his way through the corridors. The Red Keep felt as though it bristled with eyes watching him. Spies, guards, courtiers. He reached the tower where Cersei was held. 2 gold cloaks recognized him and allowed him entry into a modest antechamber. Beyond it lay Cersei's quarters, once the domain of a lesser lady-in-waiting, now pressed into use as a makeshift cell. He stepped inside. Cersei sat on a window seat, gazing out at the city's rooftops, wearing a plain gray gown. She turned at his entrance, eyes narrowing. "Back again?" she said coldly. "Come to gloat that you have father's ear? Or that you speak for the king now?" Tyrion sighed. "I come to tell you there may be a path out of this that spares your life, if not your pride. The king might allow you to return to Casterly Rock under father's custody, provided certain terms are met." She looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. "So I'm to be locked in another tower, only one made of stone in the west instead of the capital? It beats the dungeons." Cersei's lips thinned. "All this because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Tyrion pressed his eyes closed for a moment. "Sister, you would have faced this anyway. Ned Stark had the evidence. The only difference is that I forced a negotiation rather than a slaughter. Is that truly so terrible?" She turned back, face pale with bitterness. "My children are taken from me. I have no throne, no crown, no seat at Robert's side. Do you call that not terrible?" A pang of pity struck Tyrion. She truly did love her children, twisted though her methods had been. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've no easy solace to offer. If father and Robert come to an accord, you may see your children again eventually. But for now, the king insists they remain wards of the crown, so that Tywin cannot use them to incite rebellion." She stared at him, that old hateful glimmer in her eyes. "And if father refuses to yield, I suppose the city will be torn apart." "That is a possibility," Tyrion acknowledged. "But father is considering a compromise. He wants to hush up the rumor of incest." She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh yes, hush it up now that half the city already whispers it. They might as well try to hush the sea." Tyrion spread his hands. "Whispers are one thing, an official declaration is another. This arrangement spares you from a formal condemnation, at least." Cersei was silent for a long moment, looking suddenly older, more weary. "I sometimes wonder," she murmured, "if we could have simply played the dutiful wife and Kingsguard brother, hidden our secret better, never allowed Ned Stark or Jon Arryn to discover it. Then none of this?" She waved a hand at the bare stone walls. "But no, it's done now." Tyrion nodded. "The best we can do is salvage what remains. I will deliver the king's final terms to father in the morning. If he agrees, you and Jaime go free into exile. The children remain wards for a time. Perhaps in a few years, Robert will relent." "Relent?" she scoffed. "He hates me. He hates Jaime, too. My only hope is father's strength. If father manages to outmaneuver Robert." She trailed off, searching Tyrion's face. "Will you deliver father's victory for him?" Tyrion drew back slightly. "I am delivering a treaty that ends open hostility. That is all." Attention filled the space between them. Cersei's expression was somewhere between scorn and a strange, weary acceptance. "Get out," she whispered finally. "Unless you plan to set me free, I have no more interest in speaking with you." He left, the echo of the door slamming behind him resonating in his thoughts. Outside, the guards shrugged in silent sympathy. Tyrion trudged back to his chamber, passing through flickering torchlit corridors. The Red Keep no longer felt like a place of any comfort. Sansa Stark might be in some corner, weeping for a lost betrothal she barely understood. Arya might be skulking with her wooden sword, bristling with defiance at the city's gloom. The king drowned himself in wine or hammered at training dummies in the yard. Ned Stark tried to hold the realm together with threads of honor. Tyrion was ironically one of the few bridging the gap between Lannister and Baratheon. That night he slept fitfully. At first light, A servant roused him, informing him that the king's letter was prepared. Tyrion dressed, nursing a headache from too little rest. He found Ned in the solar, overseeing a scribe who sealed a parchment with the royal sigil. Robert was absent, likely not awake yet or else ignoring the formalities. Ned handed Tyrion the sealed scroll. This is the formal statement of the king's terms. There is also an addendum naming your father's demands as we understand them. Present it and see what Tywin does. Tyrion tucked the scroll into his satchel. You'll hold your muster in place until I return or send word? Ned inclined his head. We must. Robert is impatient, but he understands that launching an assault prematurely would be foolish. Still, he will not wait indefinitely. If your father has not responded in a fortnight. I understand, Tyrion said. A fortnight. If father does not yield by then, war commences. Ned's gray eyes showed no warmth. Yes. Tyrion left the Red Keep with another small escort, though smaller this time, only 10 men. The roads were rumored less safe now that tension mounted. But traveling with too large a guard might spook Tywin or be seen as a threat. He took provision for at least 2 weeks, hoping to complete the journey faster but prepared for obstacles. As they passed the city gates, Tyrion overheard anxious talk among the crowds. Rumors of skirmishes in the countryside, talk of bandits, talk of Tywin's host. Tension crackled like a drawn bowstring. Once outside the walls, they set a brisk pace. The sun was bright but offered little cheer. Tyrion fell into a brooding silence as his horse clopped along. It felt as though he was a living letter in a deadly game of pass the parcel, the fragile link between two armies. By midday, they were on the main road west again, making fair progress. At twilight, they camped in a grove, careful to post watchmen. Tyrion's men were jumpy, expecting ambush from Lannister outriders or outlaws. But no foe emerged. On the second night, they encountered a small family fleeing west. Farm folk who said they were returning to a cousin's land near Deep Den, within Lannister territory, because they believed it safer than the Crownlands. Tyrion's men shared a little food with them, hearing rumors that a band of brigands roamed the roads, stealing coin and livestock from travelers. Tyrion asked the farm folk if they had seen any large forces. They had not, aside from a few outriders wearing the lion sigil. The west was mustering but not yet fully advanced. That meant time remained. The days blurred together again, each mile a monotony of dust and caution. Every so often, Tyrion's men glimpsed a distant set of riders or smoke from a distant camp. They saw more small folk too, some traveling east, others west, all seeking refuge. Word of war had clearly spread. Tyrion felt a twisting in his gut each time he thought of father's armies marching behind him. Would he arrive only to find the camps already on the move? Or would Tywin have advanced halfway to the capital? The tension was enough to rob him of restful sleep. Late on the 5th day, they emerged onto a ridge that overlooked a broad river valley. Tyrion recognized the terrain from his previous journey. The Lannister host had been encamped near Ashmark. But now, as they peered from the ridge, the valley below was eerily empty. No clusters of tents, no plumes of campfire smoke. The banners of red and gold were gone. Tyrion's heart jolted. Had Tywin marched east already? He led his men down the slope, following the faint tracks of wagon wheels. The ground was churned by thousands of hoofprints, telling the story of a large force moving out. They found a few stragglers, a wounded sellsword abandoned by his company, a pair of camp followers who had lost track of the main host. From them, Tyrion learned that Tywin had indeed marched east, heading toward the crossroads near the Blackwater Rush. It had happened mere days ago. Lord Tywin said there'd been enough delay, mumbled the sellsword. He's meetin' the king's men on the field, or so the talk goes. We got attacked by bandits, fell behind. A cold dread seeped through Tyrion. If Tywin was already on the move, the chance to prevent war was slipping away. Where might I find him now? He demanded. Head east, Lord. The sellsword rasped. He's likely in the plains near the Blackwater tributaries by now. That was much closer to King's Landing than Tyrion would have liked. Still, Tywin must have left a rearguard, or he must have some route. Tyrion had to chase him down, deliver Robert's terms before any swords crossed. Gritting his teeth, Tyrion thanked the man and led his escort east. They had come all this way just to turn back. 3 days of hard riding followed. The terrain shifted to rolling hills, then flatter expanses. Tyrion drove his men relentlessly, ignoring their fatigue. Each day brought rumors that the Lannister host was near. They saw columns of smoke from distant villages, though whether it was for cooking fires or something more ominous, they could not say. Eventually, on a windy afternoon, they spotted a swirl of dust in the distance. A cavalry column, glinting with metal and banners. Tyrion recognized the Red Lion of Lannister. They had found a portion of Tywin's force. He ordered his men to display a white banner and approach cautiously. A group of outriders galloped to intercept them, faces stern. Their leader, a young knight with a fox-like face, demanded, "Who dares approach with a truce flag? State your name." "Tyrion Lannister," Tyrion replied tersely. "I need to speak with Lord Tywin at once. I bring new terms from King Robert." The knight's eyes widened. "We heard you went to the capital. Come, then, we will take you. But be warned, Lord Tywin is not in a patient mood." They followed the outriders back toward a large formation of footmen and knights moving in columns. War horns echoed now and then, directing the march. Camp followers trudged behind with wagons. This was no idle gathering, but a true army on the move, thousands of men, perhaps more, as far as Tyrion could see. His heart pounded. If they clashed with Robert's mustered forces, blood would soak the land. They were led to a small rise where a large tent flew the lion banner. Tywin stood outside, his horse by his side, conferring with a circle of bannermen. The wind tugged at his cloak of crimson cloth of gold. When he saw Tyrion approach, his eyes narrowed. He dismissed his lords with a terse gesture. They rode off, leaving father and son face to face again amid the churned mud of the army's path. "Why are you here?" Tywin demanded, voice cold. "You had your chance. I expected to hear some word from you before I marched." Tyrion slid from his saddle, grimacing at the stiffness in his legs. "I came back as soon as I could. You gave me no time, father." The king's council debated, prepared an answer. "I'm here to deliver it." Tywin's lips curled in faint scorn. "I waited for nearly a fortnight. That was time enough. Show me these terms." Tyrion produced the sealed parchment. Tywin snatched it and broke the seal, scanning the contents. His face was impassive, but Tyrion did not mistake that for calm. When he finished, he crumpled the parchment. "So, Robert still demands my children remain wards at court. He calls it fosterage. My daughter is exiled. My son is stripped of his cloak. My grandchildren are deemed ineligible for the throne. All for the sake of avoiding an open condemnation of incest." "Humph," Tyrion ventured. "It is the best compromise he will offer. He does not publicly call them bastards, but neither does he accept them as heirs. He spares Jaime and Cersei from execution or public trial. All you need do is disband your forces and vow no further aggression." Tywin's face tightened. "So I am to appear weak before my bannermen, returning home with naught but a worthless piece of parchment that says my grandchildren are disowned by the king. That does not sit well. And yet your other choice is war," Tyrion pointed out softly. "A war you may not win, father." Tywin flung the parchment aside, letting it drift in the wind. "I do not fear the Storm Lords or the Tullus, or even the Crownlands. My only concern is whether the Vale or the Reach might join them. The Tyrells can field a sizable force, as can the Arryns. Still, I have seen war, Tyrion. I know its cost. Perhaps it is not always the best path." Tyrion felt a spark of hope. "Then accept. Keep Jaime and Cersei alive. Let the children remain wards for a time. Once Robert's anger cools, you might negotiate for their return. If you show no sign of rebellion, Robert might be persuaded to relinquish them in a few years." He paused. "Better that than burying thousands in the mud." Tywin scowled at the horizon. His armies stretched out behind him, a fearsome display of Lannister might, shimmering with steel. If I turn back now, some of my bannermen will see me as spineless, or at least uncertain. But if this is the only way to save Jaime— Tyrion nodded. Yes, father, you know how Robert is. If you fight him, he will never relent until Jaime and Cersei's heads are mounted on spikes, and your grandchildren with them. That is the truth of it. Tywin studied Tyrion's face, searching for deception, but found only sincerity. At length Tywin said, "Very well. I will withdraw to the west bank of the Blackwater Rush, in camp, and send word to Robert that I am prepared to sign a formal truce on the condition that these wards are truly wards, not hostages. He must set a clear time frame, 5 years, say. If in 5 years my grandchildren cause no trouble, they may return to me. Jaime and Cersei will remain in my custody under the watch of a few of Robert's men, if that is his demand. In exchange, Robert renounces any public mention of incest. The marriage is simply annulled." "Agreed." Tyrion exhaled relief. "Agreed. That aligns neatly with the king's proposal, though we'll need to finalize the details. I can serve as witness if you like." "Yes," Tywin said curtly, "but I will not ride to King's Landing with you. Let Robert send a delegate to my camp, or we can meet halfway. I will not enter the city like a prisoner." Tyrion bowed. "Of course, I'll ride ahead, inform the king, and we can arrange a formal signing. Let us do it quickly, before any battle lines are drawn." Tywin's expression remained stony. "If Robert or his men attempt any deception, if they try to seize me or ambush my forces, I will retaliate. Remind him of that." "I will," Tyrion said. Tywin signaled a group of knights to approach. "Escort my sons safely beyond our lines," he commanded them. "We shall march east no further for the moment. See that the men know to hold position. Send outriders to watch for the crown's forces. We shall not start a battle unless forced." The knights saluted. Tyrion suppressed a shiver of astonishment. For the first time in his life, perhaps, he had influenced Tywin Lannister to adopt a more measured course. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream where the old lion listened to the imp. But necessity had forced Tywin's hand. Jaime and Cersei's lives were in the balance. Tyrion tried not to let relief overwhelm caution. One misstep, one hint of betrayal from Robert or Tywin, and the entire realm would still erupt. So Tyrion was led out of the Lannister camp by the knights, reunited with his small escort, and set on the road toward King's Landing again. The day was fading, the sky a sullen gray. They decided to push on, traveling well into twilight, pressing forward under torchlight. The men were exhausted, but Tyrion urged them on. Every hour counted. If Robert moved his forces to engage Tywin without knowing the old lion had halted, disaster could result. They arrived at the capital near dawn the next day, battered by lack of sleep. Tyrion's eyes burned, his limbs ached, but he forced himself up the steep roads to the Red Keep. The fortress gates opened. The same flurry of activity greeted them. Soldiers patrolling, supply wagons, the occasional group of crossbowmen drilling in the yard. Tyrion hastened inside, ignoring the swirl of dust that clung to his cloak. A court official recognized him. "Lord Tyrion, you look half dead." "I need the king," Tyrion rasped. "Now." The official scurried off. Soon enough, Tyrion was shown into the king's solar, where Ned Stark, Renly, and Robert himself had already begun breaking their fast. Robert blinked in surprise at Tyrion's appearance. Clothes dusty, hair matted, eyes red. "You again," Robert muttered. "I expected you gone for longer. Have you even slept?" "Little," Tyrion croaked. He cleared his throat. "But I bring news. I found Tywin's army on the march east. He prepared to engage, but he has agreed to halt. He will accept your terms with minor modifications. Specifically, a 5-year fosterage for Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, after which they may return to his custody if they have caused you no trouble. Jaime and Cersei are to be placed under his authority in the west, with the option for you to station a small royal guard to ensure they do not meddle in politics. The marriage is annulled quietly. No mention of incest." Renly rubbed his chin. Ned gazed at Robert, waiting for his reaction. Robert's face darkened, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. 5 years is a long time. By then, the realm will be settled, and I'll have my heir in place. Stannis, like it or not. If the whelps remain docile, Tywin can have them back, worthless though they are. He tore a chunk of bread with savage force. But if I sense even a whiff of treason, I'll have them hanged. Tyrion nodded, too tired to argue. Then we can finalize the treaty. Tywin will meet your envoys halfway between here and his camp, or he'll host them at his own forward camp if you prefer. He refuses to ride to the city. Robert shoved a goblet of ale away. So he still wants to act the proud lord. Fine. We'll do it at that halfway point, somewhere near the Blackwater crossing. Ned, you'll go. Renly too. Baelish if you think it wise. Tyrion will come along to keep Tywin honest. We'll sign our parchments, exchange the required hostages or what have you, and be done with this madness. Ned nodded. As you will, your grace. We should move soon. The men are ready. If we do this properly, the City Watch can remain behind to keep the peace while a smaller honor guard accompanies us. We'll have to bring Jaime and Cersei, of course, to hand them over. Robert eyed Tyrion. You said Tywin wants a small group of my men stationed with him to ensure Jaime and Cersei remain out of trouble. Fine. That can be arranged. Let's get it done quickly. Gods. I'm weary of it all. Tyrion felt relief flood him. At last, it seemed they would avoid the cataclysmic war that had loomed. Yet he knew better than to relax entirely. The final details might still cause friction. Jaime and Cersei might resist being delivered to Tywin under any watchful guard. The children might be frightened, but it was better than mass slaughter. Robert rose. Ned, have your men bring Jaime and Cersei from their cells. Prepare them for travel. Send word to Tywin that we'll meet in 3 days' time near the confluence of the 2 roads, by that old stone watchtower. I'll remain here in the city with enough men to keep the peace. If any trickery arises, well, you all had better fight your way out. Ned bowed. Yes, your grace. Renly sighed. I'll oversee the host. We'll take enough knights to show we're not cowed, but not so many as to threaten Tywin. Robert grunted approval. Tyrion mustered his last bit of strength to say, 3 days it is. I'll rest, then accompany Lord Stark. If that is acceptable. Ned gave him a measured look. It is. Robert flicked a hand in dismissal. Off with you then. The lot of you. I have hunting to do. Or maybe I'll find a whore. Anything is better than these damned councils. Outside, as Tyrion walked, his knees wobbled from weariness. He felt he could sleep for a week. But there was more to do, arrangements, letters, logistics. Even so, as he made his way to his chambers, a faint sense of triumph sparked in his chest. He had managed the unthinkable, bringing father and king to the edge of peace, bridging a gap that might have swallowed the 7 kingdoms in blood. Let the bards celebrate that, though likely they never would, for they seldom praised dwarfs. He collapsed onto his bed, boots and all, and let oblivion claim him for a time. When he woke, late afternoon light slanted through the small window. Rubbing the crust from his eyes, he rose to find a basin of fresh water. The corridor beyond his chamber hummed with activity. Ned Stark and Renly must be making ready for the departure. Tyrion washed quickly, changed clothes, and ventured out. He soon learned that Ned had indeed arranged for a carefully chosen escort of knights, plus wagons to carry Jaime and Cersei. The children would remain in King's Landing for the moment. Their formal fosterage would be handled once the treaty was signed. Varys had apparently written to Tywin, using swift couriers, to confirm the place and time of the meeting. Tyrion hesitated by the stables, watching grooms ready the horses. The Red Keep stables bustled with anxious energy. In the yard, city watchmen mustered, ensuring they had fresh mounts. Over by the gate, a large covered wagon stood in readiness, presumably for transporting Jaime and Cersei under guard. Tyrion found himself wishing it did not have to be so ignominious, but such was the king's will. He approached, only to find Ned Stark himself standing by the wagon, conversing in low tones with a pair of officers. When he caught sight of Tyrion, Ned dismissed the officers and turned. "We depart at first light tomorrow," Ned said. "Jaime and Cersei will ride in that wagon, guarded by 6 men. My knights will surround them. We want no chance of an escape attempt." Tyrion nodded. "I understand." He peered into the wagon. Simple wooden benches inside, with iron rings for chains if needed. A bit harsh, but less so than leg irons, at least. Ned studied Tyrion, that calm, level stare. "Do you truly believe your father will not try to turn this meeting into an ambush?" Tyrion met his gaze. "I do. Tywin is proud, but not foolish. If he wanted to start a war, he had ample chance already. He's chosen not to. I suspect he wants Jaime free of kings, landing more than he wants to risk a battle he could lose." Ned nodded, though his expression was guarded. "Then I hope you're right." He shifted his stance. "You and I may not be friends, Tyrion, but I acknowledge that you've risked much to bring us to the edge of peace. If it succeeds, the realm owes you a debt." Tyrion managed a small smile. "You honor me, Lord Stark. I only hope the peace holds." Ned's eyes flicked to the wagon, where a stable boy tested the rear latch. "So do I." They parted ways. Tyrion found a modest meal in the kitchens, then retired early, wanting to be fresh for the journey. The next morning dawned cool and overcast, perfect weather for riding. Tyrion joined Ned Stark, Renly, and a cavalcade of knights, men-at-arms, and supply wagons. The city gates opened to let them out. In the covered wagon, Jaime and Cersei rode, each with manacles on their wrists, though they were not chained to the benches. Tyrion did not see them in passing, but he heard them occasionally. Jaime cursed loud enough for the guards to hush him, while Cersei sat in sullen silence. They traveled slowly. The supply wagons rumbled at a crawl, and the roads were choked with traffic. Farmers bringing produce, refugees returning from the outskirts, the occasional group of traveling merchants. The presence of so many armed men parted the way somewhat, but it was still a laborious process. Ned and Renly led from the front, flanked by standard-bearers with banners of Baratheon and Stark. Tyrion rode near the wagon, wanting to keep an eye on his siblings if only from a distance. The first night, they camped beside a shallow river. Jaime and Cersei were kept in the wagon with a guard posted. Tyrion sought permission from Ned to speak to them, but Ned demurred. "Best not. They're restless enough without stirring them further. If the treaty is signed, you can speak freely once we hand them to your father." Tyrion had little choice but to accept that. He slept in a tent among the men, noting that while no one threatened him, few were eager to converse. A Lannister among the king's forces was an oddity indeed. On the second day, as they neared the designated meeting site, the mood grew tense. Scouts galloped ahead, scanning for any sign of Lannister forces. None were sighted until late afternoon, when they spotted a small cluster of horsemen bearing the lion banner by a ruined watchtower. That tower stood near a broad meadow, a place well suited for a parley. The watchers indicated that Tywin had arrived with a company of knights and spearmen. They were outnumbered by Ned's group, though presumably more Lannister soldiers waited within riding distance. Ned ordered the men to approach in careful formation. He and Renly, along with Tyrion, rode at the head. Behind them came a handful of knights with the wagon in their midst. Once they reached arrow range of the watchtower, Ned signaled a halt. A single rider emerged from the Lannister ranks, Ser Adam Marbrand, who lifted his visor and bowed in greeting. "My lords, we come in peace. Lord Tywin awaits." Ned Stark gestured for the wagon to be brought forward. "Then let us proceed." They advanced slowly. Tyrion's heart thumped. This was the most perilous moment, where any misstep could trigger violence. 100 yards from the tower, Ned halted. "We wait here," he called. "Bring Lord Tywin forward." Moments later, Tywin Lannister appeared on horseback, flanked by a small retinue. He wore plate and mail, though his visor was up. He reined in a few paces from Ned and Renly. Behind Ned, a ring of men parted, allowing the wagon to be seen. The watchers on both sides tensed. No one wanted to be the first to draw steel, but the tension was palpable. Ned began in a clear voice. "Lord Tywin, we come under the banner of truce to settle the matter of Jaime and Cersei Lannister, and the children. We have the signed treaty from King Robert, as you have yours. Let us put an end to this threat of war." Tywin nodded once, face expressionless. "I agree. Let us finalize the terms. Release my son and daughter into my custody, and I shall vow to disband my armies. The children remain wards of the crown for 5 years, unless the king decides otherwise. The marriage is annulled, with no public mention of incest. So stands the arrangement." "Yes," Ned confirmed. "We have the scroll here. Once you sign, Jaime and Cersei are yours to hold in the west, under the watch of a royal contingent if the king so wishes." Renly signaled, and a squire brought forth a scroll with a large wax seal. Ned dismounted, as did Tywin. Tyrion did likewise, stepping forward to observe as the two men approached each other. Surrounded by knights, they exchanged the scroll. Tywin read it swiftly, a frown creasing his brow. Then he scrawled his signature. Ned also signed in his capacity as Hand of the King. Tyrion, who had been designated as a witness, signed as well, ignoring the curious glances from both sides. "Done," Ned said, exhaling. "Now, let us see Jaime and Cersei freed." At a gesture, the wagon rolled forward. A guard opened the rear door. Jaime emerged first, manacles clinking, his golden hair disheveled. He scowled at the ring of armed men, then spotted Tywin. A flicker of relief and shame warred on his face. Behind him, Cersei stepped out, her hair in tangles, her expression coiled with fury. "My lord father," Jaime said wryly, "I see you've come to save us from the rabble." Tywin's face was stern. "You are free of King's Landing, but not of consequence, Jaime. The white cloak is forfeit. We will speak of your actions later." Jaime looked away, grimacing. Cersei, meanwhile, studied Ned Stark with undisguised hatred. Ned stood stoic, arms folded. "We have kept our word," he said. "Now you keep yours, Lord Tywin." Tywin nodded. "My outriders will signal the host. The march east is cancelled. We will return to the west. You keep the children safe in King's Landing for 5 years, or until the king sees fit. If any harm befalls them," Ned interrupted, "they will be treated as honored wards." Cersei turned on Tyrion. "And you, imp, have you come to gloat?" Tyrion met her eyes. "No, sister. I merely came to ensure peace." She spat. "I hope you rot." Tywin's face darkened. "Enough. Jaime, Cersei, come." He gestured to a trio of Lannister knights who approached with fresh horses. Tywin offered them cloaks to hide their manacles until they could be properly removed. Jaime grimaced but obeyed. Cersei glowered at everyone, but especially Tyrion, before climbing into a saddle. Tywin flicked a gaze at Ned Stark. "If the king chooses to renege on this arrangement, know that I will respond in kind." Ned nodded. "He will keep his word, so long as you keep yours." Jaime and Cersei were led to Tywin's side. Tywin surveyed the ring of men, then spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "House Lannister withdraws. We will not bear arms against the crown so long as these terms stand." He cast one final, inscrutable look at Tyrion. "Come with us if you choose," he said gruffly, "or remain in the capital as you please." Tyrion hesitated. He had not expected that invitation. He realized that, with Jaime and Cersei reclaimed, Tywin might not see Tyrion as a traitor anymore. Or perhaps he only offered it as a courtesy. "Thank you, father," Tyrion replied. "But I think I'll return to King's Landing, at least for now. The king may have need of me." Tywin inclined his head in acceptance, though Tyrion noted the faint flicker of disappointment. Then Tywin beckoned to his bannermen. "We ride," he said, turning his horse. Jaime and Cersei followed, though Cersei cast one last venomous glare over her shoulder at Tyrion. The Lannister party rode away, a swirl of crimson cloaks and banners in the breeze. The watchers from both sides exhaled. A hush of awe and relief settled over the scene. Ned Stark turned to Tyrion. "It's done, then, the war that never was." Renly rolled his shoulders, letting tension seep away. Praise the gods. I could do with less excitement for a while. A faint smile flickered across Tyrion's lips. Let us hope this truce holds. The seeds of mistrust remain, but for now, at least, no one need die. Ned nodded gravely. We'll return to the city and inform Robert. He'll be glad to avoid a battle, even if he never admits it. The realm can breathe easier. And so the forces parted. Ned's men turned back toward King's Landing, escorting the empty wagon and the watchers who had accompanied them. Tywin's men, somewhere out of sight, would begin reversing their march, heading west to disband. Tyrion rode with Ned and Renly, feeling a strange lightness. There was no triumphal cheer or feast, no shining celebration. But the stench of impending war had lifted, if only for now. They took a slower pace back, relieved that no armies clashed. As they rode, men spoke in hushed tones of how close the realm had come to chaos. The farmland they passed showed no sign of pillage or burning. Rumors would swirl, of course, that the king had discovered some scandal and quietly dissolved his marriage. But the official story would bury the incest. Tyrion wondered if that was truly the best solution. Perhaps the realm was not ready for the naked truth. When they reached King's Landing after 2 more days on the road, the gates swung open without fanfare. The watchman recognized Ned Stark's banner. Inside, the city had begun to relax. Word must have reached them that Tywin's host was not advancing. People went about their business with renewed hope. They rode up to the Red Keep, stable boys rushing to take their horses. Tyrion stretched aching limbs as he dismounted. A swirl of courtiers awaited them in the yard, including Littlefinger and Varys, each wearing carefully composed expressions. Ned and Renly strode ahead, presumably to see the king. Tyrion followed behind, passing whispering onlookers. The halls of the Red Keep felt both familiar and changed. Some tension had dissipated. Soldiers who had braced for war were now relieved. Finally, they came to the king's solar. Robert was already there, half drunk on wine but wearing a broad grin as Ned explained the successful negotiation. So the old lion backed down, did he? Robert crowed. Ha! I knew he would. Once we showed him we meant business. Ned allowed a small, diplomatic smile. Yes, your grace. He has agreed to our terms. Jaime and Cersei have been surrendered to him, and the children remain your wards for 5 years. The war is averted. Robert clapped Ned on the shoulder with enough force to make armor clank. Well done. And you, brother, he said to Renly. And yes, even the imp, I suppose, had a hand in it. He looked to Tyrion. It seems you did not betray me after all. Tyrion inclined his head. I prefer my head attached to my shoulders, your grace. War seldom ends well for dwarfs. Robert laughed, reaching for his wine. For once, your cunning served me better than your father's pride. So be it. Ned's voice was quieter. We should not forget the scars left behind. The small folk will gossip about the annulment, and some may guess at the truth. But as long as the realm sees stability and does not hunger, these matters will fade from daily talk. Robert's expression turned grim for a heartbeat. Let them talk. I'm rid of that scheming woman. I'll name Stannis as heir and be done with it. Let him wring his hands about laws if he must. For now, I'm free to hunt and whore as I please without a harpy at my side. He took another swig. Let the realm gossip. I care not. Varys stepped forward, clasping his hands. Your grace, now that the immediate crisis is resolved, we can turn our efforts to ensuring the children's comfort. Young Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen will need to be informed gently that their mother has gone away, and that they remain in the capital under your gracious protection. Robert huffed. Yes, we'll see to it. Ned, you handle that. I've no interest in coddling them. I'm off to the lists or the tavern. Ned inclined his head. Very well, your grace. Robert waved them away. All of you out. Let me enjoy my wine in peace. They departed. Outside the solar, Ned turned to Tyrion with that measured look again. It's done. I suppose you'll stay in the city. Then, Tyrion thought it over. For a time, perhaps, the king might have use for me or not. though I suspect he'll never truly trust me." Ned nodded. "Trust is in short supply here. But you've proven that sometimes a Lannister can do what is right for the realm. That alone is notable." Tyrion gave him a crooked smile. "Praise from Lord Eddard Stark? I shall treasure it." He turned to leave, then paused. "If ever you do trust me a little, know that I do not wish harm upon your family, your daughters. I hope we can keep the peace that we have forged." Ned's eyes were contemplative. "As do I. Fare you well, Tyrion Lannister." And so they parted. In the days and weeks that followed, King's Landing buzzed with the aftermath. Jaime and Cersei's departure was explained away by talk of the Queen's frail health, the dissolution of a childless marriage, publicly so, even though everyone knew there were children. The children themselves were told quietly that their mother had gone away and that Robert was no longer their father. Joffrey seethed, Myrcella wept, Tommen was confused. But they remained in comfortable quarters under the watch of septas and tutors. Tywin withdrew his armies to the Westerlands. Many of his bannermen grumbled at the show of force for no gain, but none dared openly defy him. Jaime, stripped of the Kingsguard cloak, spent his days chafing under paternal oversight. Cersei brooded, plotting ways to regain power. But Tywin kept them on a short leash, determined not to provoke Robert's wrath anew. Robert anointed Stannis as heir, though relations between them were icy. Renly continued to serve on the small council. Ned Stark remained hand, ensuring the realm's affairs were tended to with his characteristic honesty. Littlefinger, Pycelle, and Varys continued their subtle intrigues, though with a renewed sense of caution. As for Tyrion, he found himself in an odd place. No longer needed as the king's envoy, yet not particularly welcome among the more zealous courtiers who still viewed him as a Lannister threat. Robert permitted him to remain in modest apartments within the Red Keep, occasionally calling on him for financial advice or cunning counsel. Ned Stark treated him with guarded civility. Sansa Stark avoided him, still mourning the end of her betrothal to Joffrey, a betrothal quietly cancelled. Arya glared at him sometimes, but with less open hostility than she had once shown. He had, in effect, carved a niche, the imp who brokered peace. Even if no one openly praised him, Tyrion knew what he had accomplished. He would watch from the shadows as the realm trudged onward, battered by secrets and grudges, but not plunged into the fires of war, at least not yet. The seeds of future conflict still lingered, but for the moment, King's Landing breathed freely. And on certain nights, when Tyrion stood atop the castle ramparts, gazing over the black waters of the bay, he took a certain satisfaction in the knowledge that he, the least favored Lannister, had staved off catastrophe with nothing more than words and cunning. Of course, the future was never certain. The Game of Thrones was ceaseless, and new plots might one day erupt to shake the Seven Kingdoms anew. For now, though peace held by a razor's edge, Tyrion sipped his wine and allowed himself a small, wry smile. He had changed the course of history, if only for a while. He would take that as a victory.